Well, today's program we really envision as part of the series of things we're doing. You heard Margaret mentioned several events about the sesquicentennial year of Jefferson, which is 2022. 150 years as a city. The city was incorporated in 1872.
Yeah, 1854 to 1954 was a 100-year centennial, and we had a big parade.
I know. That's what I've read. But Jed McGee and I were talking this morning, and Jed checked. Where is Jed? You checked and confirmed the city was incorporated in 1872. So, what was 1954? Does anybody know this? I mean, my hunch is it was the centennial of Greene County. Does that sound right?
No, I think it was the town was founded, I mean, the town first started in 1854.
Settled in 1854.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
It's written on the Royal Jewelers side in the alley there.
Okay, so we're going to accept that for now, that 1854 was probably the settlement of Jefferson, and it was probably also the start of Greene County about that time period, from what I know of history. And in 1872, the city of Jefferson is incorporated, and here we are 150 years later. Pretty remarkable. So this program is going to bounce around a little bit. Rolfe and I have talked several times and over the time, and when you trying to keep his stories moving in an orderly way can be a little difficult because the truth is you know so much.
Well, thank you very much. Over the past 3 or 4 months, I thought about all the businesses when I was younger and all the service stations and the car dealers and where they were. And in 1954, of course, was the centennial. About 20 years later, they asked me to go through and run a contest. And so I tried to put all the various businesses around the square at that particular time. And I thought, I went through the phone books to try and figure this out. Well, guess who won? There were 3 people that had perfect scores. Lois Krause, Shirley Clark of the library, because they looked in the phone books. And also Bill Kendall, because he had lots of phone books too. So we had 3 perfect scores.
So, as we dive into this, first of all, I want to point out that he mentioned that kind of the roll call of all those businesses over the years, and we have that up here on the table, and you'll be able to come up here and spend some time on your way out. It's got the list of businesses by various categories through all the years that Rolfe and others have been able to recall. So that's over on this side of the table. Over here are 4 sheets that take you around the Greene County Courthouse Square and the business history around that square as the businesses change going around there. So those are there. We came up with 2 other pieces here. Denise O'Brien Van came in today and has a couple of pictures of the marching band going by Milligan Brothers Lumber, Grain and Coal, and by Farquhar Brown Tractor Company, Ford Tractor Company.
And later was Albert Berger in there also. Albert Berger had part of the implements.
Okay, but one thing, and then the other that is really a keeper is a menu from Louis' House of Quality with prices, coffee starting at 5 cents. But one thing I wanted to start off with our conversation with Rolfe, this is the kind of stuff I just love. Their slogan for Louis', which if you're fairly new to Jefferson and Greene County, you may not know, Louis' was the hangout from about when?
All of my life.
Well, I haven't seen it lately.
It was on the north half of where Harold Woodruff had his thing. And everybody gathered in there on Friday nights or Saturday nights during the ball games, but also during the week. You walked into Louis', and on the left side was a candy counter. And Jerry Croniger, I think, was there and made the candies. And then they had a soda fountain on the right side, And I don't know whether there were stools there or not, but no, Mary Jane says no. And then in the back there were booths, and you could order all sorts of things here, from cinnamon toast for 15 cents and peanut butter for 15 cents. And a whole list of...
Louis special, 25 cents. Fancy Sunday.
Oh, Fancy Sunday from Louis.
But what really caught my eye was a slogan, the business slogan of Louis at that time. An up-to-date establishment catering to a public demanding only what is good. That is a high bar. And so I immediately turned around to Rolfe and I said, let's go to Blaess Shoe Store. Did you have a motto, and what was your motto?
Well, first, my dad came over in 1932, and he had a business where Edward Jones is now, and that was from 1932 till 1963 when we moved up on the square. It was always called the B&R Shoe Store because my dad had $500 of his own money, $500 of his dad's money, and $1,000 from a silent partner. So it was called B&R, Blaess and Ryder. Well, they bought it from Z.D. Robinson, who had a shoe repair store, and I hear that his wife was from West Virginia, and sometimes they would close up for 6 months and go to West Virginia, and then they'd come back and open up again. But anyway, my dad came over, and so within 2.5 years, he was able to pay off the other person. But the other person, he didn't want to change the sign because he didn't make any money with the sign. He only made money when you bought shoes and resold them. So it stayed B&R until 1957 when he remodeled the store, and that was the year I graduated high school. And then in 1963, when I was in the service from 62 to 64, my mother and dad moved the store to where the Home State Bank was. And we kept our men's shoes in the vault, and we had ladies' shoes in front and also in the back. So, and that was, and I kept it going. I took over in 1968, and I closed out September 25th of '99.
Remarkable, 67 years of family shoe business.
Yeah.
And what was that slogan I was asking you about?
Oh, my dad had this wonderful slogan, we're on our toes to serve your feet. Now, the other interesting story is across the way, there was the Jefferson Bootery, and that was where the peony is, and it was run by Briggs Robertson. His wife was a school teacher, and they had one daughter, Janet. Well, anyway, they moved to Tucumcari, New Mexico, and started a store there, and my dad and mom were on their way to Arizona, and they stopped and visited Briggs, and here was this thing, we're on our toes to serve your feet. He says, I always loved that slogan.
So, to get this started in a fun sort of way, Rolfe came up with a quiz for you all. And so we're going to hand these out, and you can be noodling these and writing your answers down on them while we talk for a few more minutes, and then we'll go to the quiz answers, so we won't make you wait very long. Roger, you want to hand those out? Somebody else help Roger, please. So write your answers to these quiz questions. I'll make sure I've got our copy here, Rolfe.
Well, Rolfe, my parents ended up buying the shoe store that,
From Brown Shoe Fit Company.
from Brown Shoe Fit Company, and it was the O'Brien Shoe Store where the Peony now is.
This is Sue Wynn mentioning that her parents, the O'Briens, right?
Yeah, Bill and Katie
Bought
O'Brien.
the Brown Shoe Fit store, which is where the peony is, and it became the O'Brien.
O'Brien Shoe Store.
I'll tell you an interesting story there. Before, Brown Shoe Fit Company was
Hold on, quiet.
Brown Shoe Fit Company was there. Bob Parker worked for Brown Shoe Fit Company. Well, he really loved shoes, and so he went to work for the Maid-Rite and worked there for at least 2 or 3 years, Bob and Naomi, and they made enough money, and they moved to Nebraska and started a store there, but then came back and bought from Bill and Katie, the Parker Shoe Store at that time.
And Dad had a shoe repair shop in the back of the O'Brien
Right.
shoe store.
So, Rolfe, you are now 82 years old. You have a remarkable command of facts and memories about Jefferson. Has this been a real study for you? I mean, how have you approached this through the years?
Well, you came to me about a year ago and said, let's do a program.
Please.
Quiet.
Let's do a program like this. And so when I was in Arizona at my computer, I was just thinking, well, what were the businesses around the square? So I took the ones in 1954, which I had figured out years ago, and then I added all the ones there, and I thought, well, this won't be a very good program to just go from Potter Drug Store and the Home State Bank and Louis and so forth. So I put them all together by categories. And so it was amazing, the number of restaurants, the number of clothing stores, men's and women's, and shoe stores, and hardware stores, and electricians and plumbers. And one of my favorite sayings over my dad's, in the restroom, there was a little thing at the very top, and it was about 3 lines. And I always thought it was so good, and it applied not only to shoe stores, but it applied to every store, and especially those that weren't necessarily well capitalized. And it was the Harvard research has proved that 43% of shoe dealers fail the first year, 21% the second year, and the rest pass out of the picture during the next 5 years. So at the end of the 7th year, only 5% are left. And I think that's true of many stores, don't you?
Well, as I look at this history up here, that would seem to be the case. And so we've started talking about what the nature of retail, and we're going to talk a little bit about both retail and manufacturing and other businesses here and around the county, but just a general nature of business over all the decades. How would you characterize it? We talked about, first of all, I don't think there's ever been a time, has there, when we've had one dominant employer, unless you would consider the agricultural industry as a whole. That would be one. But just in general, we were never a company town, were we? Or if we came close, talk about that.
Well, I would say one of the first industries that I remember was AAI, or Bill Sorensen, starting to build the trampoline in the basement of Sela's Appliance and Hardware. And Ted Sela, Mary Jane's brother, was involved in that also. And then at one time they were manufacturing in 3 different buildings around town. And that was the big employer, you might say, for quite a while.
Would it have employed 150 people?
Maybe Jane would know. I don't know how many, but it was a lot of people.
More than
And
that?
it was wide distribution throughout the country. They were even on I've Got a Secret with Gary Moore and demonstrating the trampoline, and he was an AAU champ in Iowa City, and that's how he got started. But before that, of course, he was a lifeguard at the Jefferson pool, and so was Jane.
Of course, a major factor for all businesses here was that the population was once so much greater. 100 years ago today, the population of Greene County was about 20,000 people, and we're at 8,900 today. When I think I asked you, let's talk a little bit about your dad's starting a business in 1932. A great time to start a business, right?
It was the height of the Depression, but he didn't know any better.
How old was he?
25.
And he came over from Boone.
Yeah, he came over from Boone and started the store in 1932.
And I think we just heard that he did that with $2,000.
Yes.
Oh, man. So my point on the population was that retail was very strong because people were coming from all over, right?
Well, the thing about it is we had smaller farms, so therefore we had more people. And so they would come from the surrounding towns, Scranton, Sheridan, Peyton, Dana, and maybe even farther away than that. And of course, you needed to have more than one, like 2 shoe stores were better than one because you could check at one and then you could check at the other and buy the one that you preferred. Whereas if you were the only one, the business wasn't quite as good. But being that there were a lot more people with smaller farms, we had the business. As the farms got bigger, it was less viable to be in business.
And I think you told me, though, that the Blaess shoe store, over its long history, really was a solid business in terms of profitability, except one year, right? Tell us about that year.
Farm crisis, 1983, didn't make any money. I would have been out of business had I been married.
But I mean, that's remarkable, though, that for 67 years that you did make it. So.
And I think when my dad came to town, he said there were 5 shoe stores. Now I don't know where they were, but there were a lot of shoe stores, and then gradually they quit, and it was down to 2, and it was tough to pull people down half a block off the square. And so during old-fashioned bargain days, I started playing music to attract people on the square to come down and look at the shoe racks.
And how did you decide in 1999, how did you decide that was going to be it for you, and tell people about the way you went out of business?
Okay, well, my mother said when I was 58, your dad retired at 60. You might start thinking about it. Well, I had 4,300 pairs of shoes, and the town was 4,300 people. Well, that's a lot of shoes that you got to get rid of in a couple-year period. So I bought the heart sizes and kept turning around the shoe boxes, sending the shoes out in plastic bags. And I remember one lady saying, he will never be out of business by the end of September. Well, here were all these empty shoe boxes, but they thought they were all filled. And so when I ended, I only had 71 pair, and so somebody offered me some money, and I just picked a figure out of the air, price of Rockport's $125, and they could take my 71 pair. Well, they were a mishmash of stuff, and you couldn't really sell them anymore. And so anyway, he carried out the last 71 pair. I gave him all my shoestring, shoe polish, except it took me 2 years with the empty shoe boxes to give them to Kriegers because they didn't have enough room, and they always used them to carry plants out in the springtime. So anyway, that was the end of the Blaess shoe store.
And didn't you have a party at the store that afternoon?
Yeah, I closed at 1:32 since my dad started in 1932, and then we brought in Subway sandwiches and pop and that sort of thing, and I think we had about 65 people there, not only from Jefferson, but friends from everywhere.
I assume your business relationship with your father was absolutely seamless.
Oh, absolutely. It may not be as easy working for your father as you might think, but we got along fine, and he taught me a lot of good things, and he said, you may do better than me, and you may do worse, and I did better, and I did worse.
We all know how the styles and shoes change, and we've all lived that, and I figured that at some point he probably really got stuck with a real dog that he went out and bought. Can you name the worst pair of shoes you purchased and then never sold?
Oh, I eventually sold them. They were awfully ugly, though. Well, my dad would always buy the shoes until such time as I took over, and then I got the mistaken impression that anything I bought would sell just perfectly. Well, it didn't sell too well. And I had to go to Gerald Claus and borrow some money, and that was a disastrous thing in my mind because I had to think about it for 3 days. And of course, Gerald made it so easy to borrow $3,000 or $5,000, whatever it was, and it was so slow to have to pay that back.
Do you recall it was a woman's shoe, as I recall. Do you recall the style of it?
Well, it was sort of a block heel that had a black toe and it was green sides. Not so.
let's go to the quiz answers.
Okay.
Okay? So have you got your sheets filled out?
Yep.
First name of the Oppenheimer clothing owner.
Julius.
It was, Julius was the father, and Chester was the son, so either of those would be right. And did you know that Chester graduated from Jefferson High School in 1905?
Wow. Names of the Harding sisters, and who were the Harding sisters? What was their business?
The Harding sisters had a clothing store. First, as I remember, it was where the Bee and Herald currently is today, and then it moved over to where the Under Insurance is. And it was run by two sisters, a women's clothing store, and it's Winifred and Bess Harding. And Winifred
It was
also
a hat store first.
I'm sorry?
Hat store.
A hat store first.
Who ran the hat store?
The Hardings.
Oh, did the Hardings run the hat store?
Let's go on.
Okay.
What was a yeasto? Who invented it?
Well, it was John Shuey who invented it, but I had never known what really a yeasto was because I don't think I ever tried it. But I think that Denise's husband, Jack Lewis, was in the basement making up yeastos, as I understand it. No?
But it was somebody else of his age. Oh, I think it was Larry Jackson.
Oh, Larry Jackson.
Larry Jackson made the yeastos. Was it a malt or a soda or
It was
something?
kind of like chocolatey stuff. But it wasn't had yeast.
Mary, tell us
Okay,
about
the
the
yeastos
yeastos.
were actually made with yeast instead of malt. It was something that Shuey himself had dreamed up. If he had a patent for it, he would be a millionaire. But it only was in Jefferson, Iowa that you could buy a yeast. And they were very good.
And I was so happy that somebody pulled off stuff, and you look on the north side of the square and it says Rexall right now.
What lady owned the Bon Ton?
Who owned the Bon Ton Ladies Ready to Wear store? It was located right next to W.G. Woodward and Anthony's, right where John's Appliance is. And somebody here today is the granddaughter of the Bon Ton's owner. And that's Chris Roberts, and that was Lucy Wolf.
Lucy Winter Wolf. Yeah. Winter when she started.
What business did Jack Kelso own?
Insurance.
Good.
Insurance, and I think it was with Jim Copeland at the time. He served on the city council, and I think that's why we have Kelso Park. They were going to make both Chautauqua and Kelso, all Kelso, but people objected enough to make the part Chautauqua, and the back part is Kelso Park.
We'll skip on down here just a little bit. How many popcorn stands were around the square?
Well, there were 3. Do you remember them?
One
Is
was
this all
by
at
the
one time?
shoe
Yes,
store.
all at one time. Well, the one that was there the longest was owned by Clara DeWitt. It was right next to where the peony is. And it was Zelma Schreiber helped, but Clara DeWitt owned it. But then later, Jim Pollock did one on the west side of the square in the alley. And then Dennis Powers' father, and he set up one right next to mine, how do you say it? Mine Fowler's photography on that corner.
My thought.
Mike Fowler's. And I was thinking about that because Dennis ran that, but also Elvin Thompson helped him out. But I also remember that Elvin Thompson also worked at Shoppy's Cafe, and he also worked at the Redwood.
Owners, first and last names of the owners of Golden Crust Bakery.
You remember Golden Crust Bakery? Mary does, of course, and that was Saba. And of course, his first name was Saba, and his last name was Saba, and his wife's name was Edna.
What ethnicity were the Sabres? That's a very well-known name in Jefferson and Greene County history. But what was their ethnic background?
That I don't
I think
know.
it was Greek.
I think I know.
Denise?
One of those Middle Eastern countries, it's not Jordan, but it's close to Jordan.
Middle Eastern countries. Well, a Middle Eastern country.
I
Some-
thought it was Greek. What is
No.
The ethnicity of the Sabas. Well, let's go on to this one. First studio manager at KDLS Radio in Jefferson.
Who knows that?
Gary Sandberg.
No.
No.
It was, Carmody.
Tom
The reason I said Gary Sandberg was I was working at Terry at the time, and they'd send me up here to fill in for him when he went on vacation. And one time he told me, he said, you know that sound they play when a tornado goes through and the warning system? He said, I hate that sound. He said, I got a better one. I said, what is it? He said, I'm going to open the door to the studio, leave the mic on, and go running out yelling, we're all going to die.
It is stories like that that made this guy one of the most popular media figures in the history of the state of Iowa. So I want you all to join me in welcoming Rolfe Blaess's great friend and my own great friend too, Van Harden. Van, stand up. Van has now become an honorary Greene County, and even though he's still living down there in Adale or somewhere. But he married Becky McKnight, so now we're counting him as a Greene County at the same time. So, Van Harden is a high school kid in Adale working at KDLS in Perry, and this is last century, needless to say. And they send him up here to run the studio in Jefferson, and he's got the whole town excited because he's got cranking up all this stuff on KDLS radio at the time. And so people are saying, who is this young guy? They want to go meet him, and you were one of those that decided to go meet him. Tell us that story.
Well, I was sort of a techie. I loved to go visit radio stations, and so I went to visit Van, and so I thought I'd take him a cookie, and I thought that would be a nice offering.
How'd that go?
He choked on the cookie when he was on the air.
You're gonna buy that story?
I remember Tom Quinn when the boss was saying, what was going on up there on that deal?
Well, then you recalled to me, I mean, Van at WHO, you know, over his long career in radio in Iowa, one of my favorite things about his show was he was forever pulling off the most creative stunts on radio. I mean, whether it was taking us to underground caverns a mile below Iowa, or counting all the seats at Veterans Memorial Auditorium as the girls' state basketball tournament was open, sitting in every one of those seats, incidentally, all over the net. And you recalled one stunt that he pulled off up here as a young guy just starting his career.
Yes, KDLS ran a program that Van would ride his bicycle between Jefferson and Perry. And if he stopped in Grand Junction, they'd stop to watch, and then they'd start it again. But whoever would win that contest would get a pink weekend for two in Minneapolis. And one lady guessed it within 1 second.
How'd you do on that bike ride, Van?
I barely made it.
As I recall, you didn't always have these stunts totally figured out as you went into them, is that correct?
Yeah, it was more fun just to wing it.
Rolfe, let's go on here. A couple things. I'm always open for more slogans, and I'm curious about this one. You mentioned in your own draft thing that you wrote about this program, you mentioned Hills and Beck's Cafe. Where was that?
Well, this was Louis'. We had Louis first, and then I think Kai Braz, who ran a bottling works, took it over. And then there was a Bob Day that took it over, but finally it was called the Home Cafe, and that was the very last thing there. But I walked by one day, and they were locked up. And there was a sign on the door, and it says, "We are closed, we are tired, see you tomorrow." I knew it wouldn't be in business much longer.
Oldest business in Greene County. Can you say what the oldest business is in Greene County?
Well, Rick Moraine always tells us that it was the Souvenir, and then it was the Bee and the Herald. And so he claims that is the oldest business in the county.
Can anybody else think, would there be any other business that could rival that? I mean, we're talking, I guess, 1870s there probably.
Probably.
Okay. Anything else go that long? I doubt it. Let's move on and talk about a few of our most well-known businesses. I mean, I don't know if we can count them as famous. Louis is probably one of those. At least everybody's still talking about it years after it closed, but tell us about a couple of those most well-known or most famous of our businesses.
Well, I always think that it was interesting that Julius Oppenheimer started his clothing store, and then Chester took over, and then he brought in Lauren Durham, and Lauren brought in his brother Mike. But the nice thing about it is, of all the Durhams, they all remained in business here. There was Rex or Wendell and his twin brother Wayne, and I remember them putting an air conditioner in our house, and I must have been talking to Wendell because Wayne came back later, and I thought it was the same guy, and I kept on carrying on. And then of course the sanitary meat market, and that was Stubb, also Eugene, and Darrell, and that went on for many, many years too. So Durhams were a driving force in our town as far as different businesses. And I think that Durham Electric came back in about 1948. Chris was just telling me that they were in the basement underneath the former Angie's Tea Garden, and they had to pull up some of the refrigerators and that sort of thing from the lower level and bringing it up. And then I remember them also being where Danielson's was for a number of years before they moved out to the highway where you remember it.
The Louis restaurant, soda fountain, I guess. Let's name a couple of restaurants that would rank up there.
Well, we should all remember Shoppies because they were a wonderful restaurant.
Where located where?
And that was located in the, Oppenheimer's was right on the alley, and they were the next business.
What side of the square?
North side of the square.
Okay.
North side of the square. And let's see, that was good, but I also have to tell you about when I was about 9 or 10 years old, they had a restaurant at the airport. You remember Hap Dusenberry? It was called Hap's. The thing that I remember more than anything else there was they must have had pans a certain size, and they would put hash browns in there, and they would be just glowing with butter. They were the best hash browns I've ever had.
Were Seba's Donuts as good as Randy Bunker's Donuts were the successor donut?
Well, I hate to disparage any other business, but I don't think there's anything better than Seba's Donuts, and the paper boys would come in the back and he'd give them donuts, but up front Edna would charge you every time.
Can I add to that? In that bakery shop, Seba developed the recipe for his pastries. That has never been in the hands of anyone else owning. Only people who own it get that privilege. So Randy's stuff was the same recipe Seba used and so forth. I thought that was interesting.
We have not really answered this. We referred to it several times. Who was Louis Tronchetti?
Well, Louis Tronchetti, I remember he was bald. And the hours must have been terrible. I don't know how many hours they were open a week. Probably in the morning till late at night. Or were they open 7 nights a week or closed Sundays? I don't know about that. But I know that was the most popular place. Everybody always refers to Louis. It's just amazing.
The Redwood.
Yeah, Bill Hanna's Redwood was a fantastic restaurant for many, many years.
Located,
And that was located out where
the Redwood Hotel.
Hotel is, yeah. And people would drive from miles around. They had wonderful pies. They had good food all the way around. Bill Hanna was the owner.
It was the church, Bill, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They turned it into church.
that's right. A name that we often forget was one of, I guess we have to say, he's one of Greene County's most successful business people. Eventually, although most of his success happened away from here, but he really got started here, was Jack Peaster. Who was he, Rolfe, and what do you recall about him?
Jack Peaster graduated, or at least went to high school here, and then he went off to Des Moines, and we had a gas station where the Twin Shop is right now, and it was Derby Gas, and their slogan was, "Derby, it's a gas."
Jack Peaster went on to own a refinery and a whole chain of service stations all over the Midwest. I think he was based in Wichita, Kansas, and I believe he's still alive. Does anybody know? I mean, he would probably be, he's a little older than you are, so
I am, yeah.
mid-80s.
I suppose he'd be 88, maybe.
Yeah, we'll hope he's doing okay. As we think about those names of people that were influential in business one way or the other, we could talk about several bankers, of course, but let's talk about Warren Garst. What do you recall? What do you know about Warren Garst?
Well, I remember that he was the head of the Home State Bank, and as you'd walk in the door, he'd be up at his desk, and it would be on a higher level, and he'd be able to look over everybody that was coming in the store. And I remember going in when I was about 8 or 10, and Evan Hobb was there, and I deposited my 50 cents in my savings account, and there was Amy Ingebrigtsen, and Maxine Long was there, and
Shirley Williams.
And I'm sorry?
Shirley Williams.
No, that was the other bank. She was the Jefferson State Bank. And that was, the head of that was Ralph Maloney, and later Russ Holt.
Tom Cooper.
And Tom Cooper, thank you.
What was the most, Gerald Claus, of course, too, was he a successor to Warren Garst?
Yes, Gerald was a successor, and he came from Grand Junction, and he has relatives in the area.
Doug McDermott can maybe help us with this. In the Warren Garst era at Home State Bank, they offered the most unusual banking service I have ever encountered anywhere. Do any of you have a clue what I'm talking about? Rolfe, do you recall?
No, I don't recall what you told me, so you go ahead and tell the story.
Doug, tell us the story. Former president of Home State Bank.
All I can say is that they bought a bull and they gave it out to farmers to use the bull. He was promoting cattle at that time.
They had a big bull. It didn't have an office. God, if that had happened in Van Harden's era in radio, we would have never gotten him out of town. We've talked about Bill Sorensen, of course. That business is still with us today. It's fantastic. Several generations later. We referred to the Moraine family, 75 years in newspapering here, which is a remarkable run in itself. The Milligans. Talk about the Milligans.
Okay. This is maybe before my time a little bit, but I think it was in the Milligan building, which is now RSV 1875, and Frank Milligan started selling genuine simulated diamond rings. And he was on a radio station in Del Rio, Texas, which had huge power that covered maybe all of our country. And it's made our post office a #1 post office because they had so much mail. And then he expanded into women's clothing and many other things, and they hired lots of people for the Imperial Diamond Company.
And you want to imitate their commercial that they would do on that Del Rio, Texas radio station?
No, I'd let them do that.
Give it a try.
Hello, everybody. It's time to get your genuine simulated diamond ring. Send 298 to Imperial Diamond Company, Jefferson, Iowa.
I think that's sell today. I think maybe you ought to try it.
Mary,
You got one?
I just wanted to add to the Frank Milligan thing. We also had the Golden Crown. There was a building which is probably part of the Elks driving their parking lot. And he sold, actually we had well, it was supposed to be a spot remover. It was a granular spot remover. And if somebody wrote in and asked for a box of those, and they sold all of the little boxes of spot remover, then they could have their choice of a premium. And he had these really cheap diamond rings. You know, a lot of the guys in the Southeast fell for that. And I'm sure there were a lot of disappointed women when they learned that.
I keep seeing Steve and Molly when we start these stories about, Steve and Molly's up here nodding his head, and I'm thinking, that guy was part of this.
Some of the young people that used to work up there, they said they didn't only remove the spot, it removed what the spot was on.
the spot was on.
Wear rubber gloves.
When I was in high school, I worked there in the summer. And when we filled these little cylinders with the spot remover, the granulated stuff. And all these businesses all developed from Frank Milligan, and later they went belly up.
On the other hand, we produced a product here that was so damn good, it drove itself out of business, and I'm talking about Thermogray. Tell us about that, Rolfe.
Yeah, Percy Gray invented the Thermogray. They lived where Kurt Nelson lives today, but it was Percy and Dorothy Gray, and it was a water heater that was twice as big as our normal water heater today, had lots of insulation around it, but the power company offered a separate meter, and it would go on in the evening and nighttime hours and then go off during the day, but it would have enough heat in there to continue to give you plenty of water until the next cycle would be there.
They were so good, I think Jeanette Henning still has one in her basement. We had one on the Brown farm when I lived south of Scranton, a huge one. And I don't know whether it's still there because I don't live down there anymore, but we had a huge one, and you never ran out of hot water.
Amazing, Roberta. Thank you for that. When we were talking about the Milligans, and one other person I want to mention, and then we'll go to some of your stories. Anybody wants to tell us a story about business figures or companies?
The Jefferson Creamery was a big business too, and they delivered milk in bottles to homes around the town, and that was run by Mike Bruner. And after he retired, Kern Elric and Fritz Robinson. And Fritz died of cancer, and then Kern ran it for a number of years thereafter.
And actually, we can go way back. We're talking about creameries. We should go way back and mention the Gallup family, which ran a dairy here. And of course, the Gallup family became famous as the family that launched the Gallup poll and many other media-related businesses. So. But one other figure I wanted to bring up, and I only became aware of her in 2017, Jerry Roberts and I were doing our county fair history chats that we've done had done for 5 or 6 years. We got into talking about grain elevators. And then Larry Thompson, who had been a West Central Co-op executive, told me, he said, we ought to tell a story about Alma Shorey Young. You remember her?
Oh, absolutely. I remember her work for the Milligans. and she ran the elevator, and she was the only one in Iowa, a woman, that would run an elevator.
I think we got it established actually that she was the only woman running the grain elevator in America for about 15 years. Larry Thompson said they'd go to the national conventions and it'd be these huge rooms of men in Alma. He said she could really hold her own. He said nobody knew the grain business as well as Alma. So we're using this going to talk about this at the county fair, and Larry Thompson called me the night before we were going to talk about this, and he said, I think she's still alive. I think she's in Mountain Home, Arkansas. So I get up the next morning and I get on the phone and I call this woman in Alma Shore Young in Mountain Home, Arkansas, and she doesn't know me from Adam. And I said, I hardly even knew what to ask. And I said, ma'am, have you heard of Greene County, Iowa? And she laughed and said, well, of course I have. And I said, were you the grain elevator manager in Jefferson, Iowa for the Milliken Company way back when? And she says, best job I ever had. So we told her story that day at the county fair, and that led to, we sent her a video of our program out there and sent it down to her in Arkansas, and she calls back in mid-September and she said, you know, I've been sitting here watching that program again. She's 92 years old. She said, I've been sitting here watching that program again, and my birthday was coming up, and my nephew called me and he says, well, Aunt Alma, what do you want for your birthday this year? And she says, I want to go home one more time.
Oh.
And so she came to Jefferson on the last weekend of September in 2017, and the Landis Co-op, then the successor, helped at the Historical Society. We hosted her and had a reception at the museum, and then she toured Landis's operations. She toured the old elevator that she ran, and it was just great. And then we, of course, took her out and put her on the combine with the Lawton cousins as they were harvesting corn out there, and she just had a great day out there. It was really fun. But 15 years, the only woman running a grain elevator in America.
And when she sort of semi-retired with her husband, they bought my uncle's home on Twin Lakes.
Oh, I do remember they moved up there, that's right. Final people I want to ask about, and I think you have some insights on this. I don't know if you knew, you did not know them, I guess, but the Mahaneys. You know about the Mahaneys.
Well, the interesting thing, and you can get this at the library, and I think in the Historical Society, but there were a number of people that drove with Mahaney, and they gathered around my kitchen table some 30, 35 years ago. They're all passed away, but it was like Francis Cudahy, Wayne Winey, Doug Schreiber, and the other one or two escapes me, but they talked about Mahaney and his wife. And one of the neatest things was that they never had any children, but Dora wanted something painted, and so Mahaney was always trying to save a buck. I mean, a nickel was primo. But anyway, he mixed up some paint, and so he painted the walls in their house. And I guess Dora came back and said, that is an atrocious color. And he was mad as heck with Dora, and they weren't going to speak until she went to the kitchen and she made popcorn, and that wonderful smell came in, and they made up and they ate popcorn together.
What a lovely story. It just occurred to me, though, after all of our making over of our friend Van, we neglected to say that you came out of that shoe store not only with cookies, you invested in radio. What got you into that, and when was it, and how did you drag him into this, or him drag you into this?
Well, you all remember Jack Lyon. I have a cute little quick one. One of the radio stations, TV station, interviewed him, and they said, the lady asked, are the customers always right? He says, no, but we can talk about it. But anyway, Jack was into a lot of things, and I should tell you about the Lion building, because there were many lions in that building. The grandfather cut hair. And then Marvin came along and he had a sports shop, and he also sold cameras and then turned into real estate. And then Jack took over and he had Stereo Town selling stereos and that sort of thing and repairing stuff, and did business band radio. But then he saw where there was a license for Jefferson, Iowa to have a radio station.
An FM station.
An FM station. So he signed on at 98.9 and ran it for a little while and played music, and then I think he wasn't making much money that way, and so he shut it down. Well, then he got the idea that maybe Rolfe should invest in that. So anyway, I decided to do a third, and Dan decided to do a third.
How old was he? Was he still riding a bicycle at that point?
Probably so. I don't remember. But anyway, Ben was working at WHO at that time, and he went to the WHO folks and said, I'm still going to continue to work for you, but I want to be involved in this particular operation. So we were 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Well, Jack really wanted out, and he made it difficult because Van said at one time, when you were around him involved in this business, that was stress. So I ended up buying the other third, not necessarily wanting to, but I did. And anyway, we programmed it, and we owned it for 2 years, from December 30th, 1991, all of 92, all of 93. But then we had decided, because we weren't making a lot of money, that we were going to shut it down. Now, for being religious, this is a good story. We were going to shut it down, and we decided this on a Monday night. On Tuesday morning, the phone rings. Hello there, this is Pat Delaney. We're looking to buy a radio station in your area. Could yours be for sale? It was a something from heaven. And so, Pat Delaney and Lee Norman took it over and ran it for about 10 years. They moved the transmitter to Junior Scala's farm because when it was downtown, it interfered with phone calls in the courthouse. You can listen to KLSF. And then they changed it to KGRA, and then Van and I were out of the local radio business, but it's now in its second owner, Mill Store of Knoxville, I believe, or Winterset.
Rolfe deserves a lot of credit on that deal that I don't think he ever got, because when we were first talking about doing that, that frequency would have gone to some other community. It would not have been here. And because of what happened, it was saved for Jefferson, Iowa. And I love, you like slogans? Our slogan was 98.9, just a little bit warmer than you are.
Which of you two made that up? That is hilarious. I want to thank Carson Roberts. He's our director of digital history, who records a lot of this stuff that we do in programs and that. And I think of the importance of having this interview on video in years to come as we reflect back on the sesquicentennial and just on the general history of Greene County. It makes me think of we've done similar interviews. Several of us have on the board of like old Jim Andrew and Andy Geisler's mother Mary. And Skeeter Wilbur, and so many others that have been influential parts of this county's history, and I hope we can continue to do that in the future. So Rolfe, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I want to point out that Chuck Offenburger, a number of years ago, put a website in that sort of spoofed Jefferson, but there's a lot of pictures on that website, and it's just JeffersonIowaNews.com. I invite you to look there. First of all, you'll get a lot of humor out of it, but if you go to the photo section, I mean, there's many, many early day photos of Jefferson telling you stores that you never have heard of previously. So that would be a good one, and also Facebook.com, Jefferson, Iowa -news.
Anybody else got a story that we need to hear before we leave? Denise, let me just bring this back to you.
Forgot to mention.
Just a second. Just a second. There you go.
Thanks.
You started off.
You left-
forgot to mention.
Yes, we left out in our discussion today 4 or 5 businesses that were very, very, very popular with certain parts of the community, and that other people in the community never even set foot in. And I'm talking about taverns, and Kendall's Pool Hall, and the card, what was it called? It's where the Beacon Herald is now. It was a card where men went to play cards.
Oh, you mean Lefties?
Was that what it was called? Lefties?
Lefties was a cigar store.
The cigar store, that's what it was. And you can still see the cigarette burns on the floor of our present day coffee shop. The other, one of the other places.
Kendall's Pool Hall.
That's what I'm going to talk about, was Kendall's Pool Hall. That women, I don't believe women ever went in, but I went in at one time. My grandpa Tom and I were going out to fairgrounds to see the sulky races, the horse races, and he said, Dee, I'm going to stop here and I want you to run in to the pool hall and get yourself a stack of peppermints. So in I went. I was 7, so I was probably the only female who was in that store. Not frequently, but once. One more story.
Yes.
There was a tavern on the north side of the square called, I think it was called the North Side. And in the late 40s and early 50s, there was a lot of labor unrest, especially among coal miners. And my family and I would eat lunch and we would listen to Jack Shelley give the news at 12:30. And they talked a lot about John L. Lewis, who was in Iowa, who was the head of that union. And so I was uptown one day walking by that Northside Tavern. I was probably 7, 9, 10. And they had a metal plate on the screen door that said, no minors allowed. I was outraged. Coming from a rather liberal family. So I went home, told my dad, and he explained the difference between minors and minor.
I'm calling back here, guys. Rolfe, we did not talk about the Dobendick family. How many generations deep are you at Jefferson Telecom now?
5.
When did the Dobendicks move here originally?
In 1938, they were asked by the Mutual Telephone Company to come in and see if they could make it a going business.
And it came from Northwest Iowa?
Yes. Yeah. They started in the telephone business out in Nebraska and came over to Iowa.
And Jim, how long did you head the company, kind of turning things over now to Jamie and the rest of the crew, but how long were you the head of that company?
I think it was 1985 that I started.
Could you, as I think about...
I'll tell you one story.
Yeah.
Larry Bill took me out when I started at age 16 in the summer, and he said, you've got the perfect job. You're going to start at the top. So I started at the top, and then I dug down to the bottom of the hole.
The remarkable thing about Jefferson Telecom is, family-owned company like that has, honest to God, we wouldn't be where we are today in Greene County had they not been on the front edge of all the technology change over time. And I tell Dwayne Russell this, when I saw him delivering fiber optic to Cooper, Iowa, of all places, and they're burrowing under the Raccoon River and then right up the 200-foot bluff on the other side, and then so they can get it to my house, I said, from now on, whatever that phone company asks me to pay, I'm in. Any other parting stories that we need to tell? Colleen?
Hi, I'm Colleen Hanson Irwin, and the reason I came to Iowa was in 1938. And do you remember Nellie Hopper was the librarian in Jefferson for 37 years? And my dad said he was so tired of getting burned out in the crops in Nebraska at Ord. And so she rented him a farm north of Farland from Charlie Cockrell. And that's how we came to be in Greene County. And they practically got down on their knees and kissed the green grass because we didn't have any then.
Wow, thank you. Got time for one more.
Mary.
Mary, did you have another one you want to tell? Huh?
Well, there are two things that I wanted to tell you about, and one has to do with the Dominic situation. The first member of that whole telephone business was Carl Dominick's father. His father went into Washington, D.C., and when he came home, Jefferson only had one telephone company. For a lot of years, it was Bell and Mutual. You could not call one another. It was impossible. If you had a mutual, you could only talk to the other folks who were with the mutual company.
And many businesses have
It created
telephone.
a problem. At one point, there was a gentleman in town who had an illness, and a death was created because they didn't have the telephone service. Carl did 2 or 3 months in jail because of that. He was German. They painted a swastika on the front of that telephone office. It was a really bad time for the Dominicks, and they were wonderful people. Lastly, I'll tell you a story about Chester Offenburger. When he was a young man, and Chester was a very small person, the lady came in, his dad had run an ad in the paper that he had pants that he was putting on sale for $2.98. This lady came to the store to buy a pair of those trousers, but they were on a high shelf, and Chester couldn't reach the pants. His dad was in the back room, and he yelled, "Dad, would you come out here and take your pants down and show this lady?"
You just never know what you're going to hear. Give Mary Lynch a microphone and you've got to watch out. Okay, one more time, send us off with it. Give us the Van Harden full treatment of the slogan of KLSN Radio that you and Rolfe ran.
You want me to say it on radio voice?
Oh, yeah.
KLSN 98.9, just a little bit warmer than you are.
Thank you so much for being here today. You really have.
You know, I was going to say, when Star Wars came out, I remember people calling me at the station. They said, "You spent some time up there in that Greene County area." Yeah. Well, is it true that Harrison Ford lives up there?
Man, thank you. But most of all, Rolfe Blaess, thank you. This has been a remarkable